welcome to Even the Dog Has ADHD because apples don't fall far from trees and there's never just one. I'm really thrilled to have Pat Brady here with us today. Pat and I met when I was in my last corporate role, and we were chatting about this podcast. And he shared his story with me about what it's been like supporting his son growing up. Pat raised his son with his wife in the US. So that's just a frame that we'll be talking about US education and medical systems. Hi, Pat. Welcome.
Hi, Diana. Thanks for having me here. I appreciate it.
Really lovely to have you. So, Pat, do you want to tell us a bit more about the beginning journey with
Sure.
Will?
Yeah, so our son Will, he's 19 now. So this started a while ago. We live in Baltimore, which is a city on the East Coast of the United States, about an hour north of Washington, D.C., for the people who are listening who aren't familiar. And we actually live in the city. And so Baltimore is a really kind of older East Coast city, had at one time a strong manufacturing base, but a lot of that population in the city has moved out to the suburbs. And so as a result, the tax base is not as strong as it once was, and that directly affects the local schools. And so different from how you guys talk about them in the UK, when we talk about public schools, those are really the state-funded schools, state and city-funded schools, and they're just not particularly good in Baltimore. And so when our son was, and so if you can, you send your kid to an independent school, and there are a series of really good independent schools that go from really first grade up to the last year, 12th grade, last year of high school, as we call it, before kids go to university. And so that means when kids are in nursery school, really, and in kindergarten, they're going through a testing process to get into and selected by one of these schools where they'll spend the next 12 years, most likely, completing their educational journey before going on to university. Well, our son Will, didn't do well in any of the testing. He didn't get into any of these schools. And so it was really a shock to us. And one of our, I think his nursery school teacher, kindergarten teacher, said maybe you should have him tested and just see, what comes up, if there's anything wrong. Are there, developmental delays? Are there any issues? And Will had been a late talker as well, so he started talking a little bit late. And so we were always kind of mindful that maybe there was some developmental delay there.
Mm.
But that's a quirk of Baltimore, the school system. The thing that was good for us is that we have world class, and I mean world class, medical facilities in Baltimore. Johns Hopkins University Medical Center is there. It's one of the best medical schools in the world. It's in the country. But adjacent to that, there's a place called Kennedy Krieger, the Kennedy Krieger Institute, which is also a world-class facility, but it happens to focus on kids with developmental and physical disabilities. And so as a result, we had the option to go put him through a series of neuropsych tests with world-class individuals. And what it came back was, and we've kind of repeated these every year to see if they change as he grew, and they didn't. And so on any given day, Will exhibited qualities of having ADHD, dysgraphia, executive function disorder, and kind of a whole hodgepodge of slight, neuropsych deficiencies. That's not the right word, but neuropsych developmental delays.
It's the grade and
Yeah,
expected achievement developmentally for a child.
yeah, developmental delays, and so ultimately they get all kind of classified under executive function, and and throw on top of that a little bit of, probably because he was being tested so much, some anxiety, and things like that. And so it was really kind of a shock to us. And then we began the process of looking around for what's the right school for Will? Where can we take this little lump of clay who's only 6 or 7, I think, at the time, and where's the best place for him? And so then we went to, after neuropsych event, we went to an education counselor. Now, I guess I got to stop and say we're incredibly fortunate, right? I have a good career. My wife has a good career. So we had the resources to do all this. And we often talk about how difficult it must be for parents who didn't, right? And so then we went to a woman who was an educational counselor, and she said, these of the schools in the area that have programs for supporting kids like Will, here's the one or two I think that would be best for you, and maybe you should go look at them. And so we did, and we ended up finding a place that was in the city, not far from our house, literally like a mile and a half down the street. A place that we drove. So when I would commute from Baltimore to Washington D.C. in the morning, I would drive by it every day, and I always thought it was a funny little school. And we found out it was an art-based school that was very heavily focused on teacher to student ratio. So, there'd be one teacher, 3 kids, maybe 8 kids in a class, 2 teachers, things like that, where they also worked in physical therapy, occupational therapy, into the arts-based curriculum. And Will just loved it. As much as, I guess, let me step back, as much as any kid could love school at that age, right? Will really enjoyed it. And the lab school, as it was called, the Baltimore Lab School, was an outgrowth of the lab school in Washington D.C. And so there's only 2 in the country, and we had one of them. And it ended up being it's this wonderful place for kids that have a variety of different challenges as they grow up in school, but it's a very nurturing environment. And you can spend all 12 years there, and kids go there from college, but Will ended up spending 8 years there, through what we call junior high, and now we call middle school. When I was a kid, we called it junior high. Now it's middle school. And at that time, my wife and I were kind of looking at this and saying, well, maybe we should. And my wife's a professor at Johns Hopkins, so very much into education, and she's the education guru in the family. Maybe we should think about challenging Will a little bit more as we think about putting him into college. And if college is the right way for him, the best way we'll figure this out is maybe mainstreaming him a little bit more in terms of his high school experience. And so that's what we ended up doing. So let me just stop there. I threw a lot at you in that little story, to see if you have any questions.
Yeah, I do. So we've talked a little bit like what you're expressing there when he sat those tests as a small child, and he just didn't get into any of those schools. At that time, that was a shock for you and your wife, because you guys have really excelled in your own education. You've excelled in your careers, that same path. And at that time, this was all new to you. But since you've been going on this journey, maybe we could touch on that kind of conversation that you had, when you were moving him from to, I can't remember the acronym, to basically your family physician on this journey. How old was he when you had this conversation?
Oh, so that he was much older then, because we don't. So the conversation you're talking about is when So I guess stepping back is, so in the process of all this, we clearly did a lot of reading about these different diagnoses that Will had, and my wife and I both looked at ourselves and say, I see some of these qualities in myself, especially more so the ADHD one, I think, than anything else. We see some of these qualities in ourselves. And my wife was really reading up on it, and she said, I think, gosh, I look at this and I see, of you and I and our families, I think your dad had exhibited some of these characteristics the most. And in hindsight, and looking at it then, and looking at what his career had been at that time, and he had been successful and everything, but there had been, I think, strong indications probably that he probably did have ADHD undiagnosed. And so ultimately, I remember when I was talking to my primary care physician when I was in my late 40s, so it's not too long ago, maybe even 50, I said to him, I wonder if I have ADHD, because I have trouble concentrating on things lately, and sometimes it's so tough to get going. I just kind of spin. And he said, well, you're 50. you've got a career, you've got a family, you've got, you're keeping a lot of things, a lot of balls in the air. He said, I would expect there to be some ADHD of anybody that age, just because we're dealing with so much stuff. And we kind of laughed about that. And I left it there because, I guess I could go get a diagnosis, and maybe I will. It doesn't really interfere with my work. I kind of can self manage it. I know when I'm starting to spin, and I know how I can kind of refocus and things like that. But I just, I definitely think there's a family component to this, and it's something that my wife and I've talked about a lot. And of
So
course, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Pat, what kind of strategies have really helped you in terms of the spin? Because I think people will find that quite relatable. I know I certainly find that relatable. What's really helped you in terms of self-managing that?
So there's a few things. Generally, in actually, COVID was a great help for this because we could all start working from home. So I found that working out in the middle of the day helps me significantly. It refocuses me. If I can't do that, just stepping away from my desk for a little while, getting off of my computer where I have 5 or 6 tabs open, maybe, and sometimes I find, 3 half-written emails. So I come back, I close out the tabs, I refocus, and I come back 5, 6, 7 minutes later. It's just enough. Get a drink of cold water. It's just enough, and that's why I often think it's not that serious with me, because I can refocus pretty quickly if I just step away and shut down like all the different screens just for a couple minutes, and it's kind of a reset for me, really.
Yeah. And you mentioned very briefly that your wife found a little bit of recognition in herself. Is did I hear that right?
Yeah, and I think it's much of the same type of things. Is it ends up when there's a lot going on, or when she'll often find like, oh, I started that and I never got back to it, and I got distracted from this, and I need to refocus, or I need to kind of I need to get away from the computer for a little while, because she spends her life on the computer like we all do. I think it's more just with her. I really think it's just a busy lifestyle with a lot coming at her, honestly. Because when I see her, well, although when I see her concentrate, it's incredible. Nothing can. So maybe she has that hyperattention
Hyper
thing.
focus,
Yeah,
laser sharp.
yeah, that's pretty impressive when she does it.
So I remember when we talked previously that kind of transition from specifically supported younger years for Will, and as he was sort of coming into his teens, you involved him, didn't you, in that transition and school selection?
We did, and there's a couple things that kind of happened concurrently there. So one was we had always resisted medication for Will when he was really young, because we wanted him to be able to tell us and vocalize intelligently what effect the medication was having on him. So, he could then say, not just I can focus better or I can't, it's can I focus better? Am I not having, is my appetite decreased significantly? All these other things. Am I crashing at the end of the day? Am I, whatever we've heard and we know of a lot of these side effects of the medication, we wanted to make sure he was a partner as much as he could be, at 11, 12, 13, into that discussion. So as he was getting to that age and he was starting taking medication, and medication makes some a difference for him, but not a huge difference. He even now doesn't really take it. He doesn't like it. He doesn't like to crash at the end of the day. And we've gone through a couple different versions of different types of medication. So around that time, also we kind of always instilled him the expectation you would go to college. And even if it's not for the career you want, having more education in life is never a bad thing, right? And so as he was getting to that age where we were thinking about high school, we asked him what he wanted to do. And he said, yeah, I'd like to try a different school. And so then the process was of applying to different schools. And we knew enough and talked to enough people. Again, educational counselor came in, and the school he was in was really good about helping with the transition and giving us ideas to go to. We identified a certain number of schools in the area that had programs that were specifically designed to be supportive for kids who had learning differences. And so we narrowed it down to about 3 or 4 schools. He had to go through a testing process, an interview process. It was all white knuckled again because, a shy kid, he doesn't do well in interviews. And he ended up getting the top three, he ended up getting into two of them. And one was a smaller school. So both were faith based. One was Catholic, one was Lutheran. Doesn't make a difference, but religion wise, but we did find that the faith based schools had better programs for kids with learning differences than the independent schools that weren't faith based. So that ended up being kind of interesting. But the one school, the Lutheran school, was significantly smaller. It was probably 12. Well, this was just for high school, so 4 years, maybe 500 kids, 600 kids, so maybe 150 kids, 125 kids per class. Still relatively small. And then there was a larger school that he ended up getting into that had about 250 kids per grade. Significant sports school. Will's not a kid who plays sports. He grew up really tall, really fast, never been particularly coordinated, plus with all the other issues, just sports weren't his thing. So this is like a sports school, but still good academics. Going from a school where he had 6 kids in his grade, really, to 250 is a big step up. And he got into that one as well. And we gave him the choice. And he's like, I want to go to the big one. I want to go. That's where I want to go. And so, you know, and thinking about it now, it's like that was a pretty courageous. I think a pretty courageous decision on his part, right? And
Yeah.
it was. It's only 5 miles from our house, but it's like 5 miles through the city, so it takes a half hour to get there in the morning. It's more of a commute. He didn't know anybody there, whereas some kids from that side of the city and the suburbs over there was more groups of them. And so he went in as a total kind of newbie with no social support, no friends there. Ended up doing really well. The program was well designed. We got him, my wife. So my wife is an engineering professor, so math and sciences were hers. Me, kind of a history major in public relations. English and history were mine, and my wife took the foreign language, Italian, as well. And so we kind of divided and conquered, but it was clear the math and sciences need more work. And so she spent so much time working with him every night, making sure homework was done, teaching him good strategies for being a good student. And he ended up doing well. You know, we have the honor roll or dean's list. I guess that's consistent probably in UK schools as well. But he ended up being, first or second honors most of his time there. And it wasn't an easy time. It was through COVID. It was, remote learning, going back with masks on. And he did well. I mean, he did really well.
Well,
So we're really happy about that.
I'm just reflecting back a bit there, Pat. That early intervention and that early support that you as a family managed to create for him, and those kind of strong roots and the courage he had and the desire he had for trying something completely new. I mean, that's something really to be celebrated. All that. I know it would have been hard those early years, figuring out what is it, what kind of support that he needs, and then as a whole family supporting him through that secondary education. And and that's it's just really really beautiful story of his parents were always investing and hoping, but ultimately it's our children's choices how they respond to what we pour into them.
Yeah, and we had to make sure that, so if left to his own devices, Will, like many teenagers would probably spend all his time in front of a computer game. Since he doesn't like sports much, right? He doesn't like athletics. He'd spend all his time in front of his TV playing video games and whatever. And so we had to make sure also, I think, to get him kind of socially interacting with other kids his own age. So certainly friends from school and spending time with them on weekends. But we also, at some point, got the idea, and I think it was probably my wife again who got the idea. She's the source of all the good ideas in the family, I think. Said we really should sign Will up for first Cub Scouts, and we had an okay experience in Cub Scouts, but then we found a Boy Scout troop when he, again, I think it's probably at a 12, 11, 12, 13 years old,
Mm-hmm.
where they bridge over into Boy Scouts. We found a fantastic troop, again, near our house. We're lucky, it was 5 minutes up the road, where he ultimately spent the time and became an Eagle Scout. And, you know, I'm sure spending a weekend in a tent in the rain and cold wasn't his idea of fun all the time. And I ended up spending a lot of those weekends with him, of course. And it wasn't my idea of fun either. Sometimes, right? Sleeping on the ground, I'd much rather been in the bed, cozy bed, instead of out in 20-degree weather. It ended up being, I think, good for him because it was a socialization that he wasn't getting because he wasn't playing a sport in some instances. And for a while, he was at a smaller school. And then as he went to a bigger school, the school rivalries came into play. And so he would have that back and forth with the kids and scouts that I think all kids need, that kind of jocularity, that competition, that all of that ended up being, I think, very, very good for him. And so we're really, and the other thing is that because Will's an only child, being in scouts gave us a cohort of parents that we could speak to weekly on, hey, does your kid really smell? I mean, because our kid, as much as he takes a shower, he smells all the time, right? And there weren't really many other kids in the neighborhood that were his age. And whether it was that or what do they, do they spend a lot of time watching videos of people playing video games, or is it just that my kid's extra weird? And like, no. So we had this network that helped to validate a lot of things that were going on around him and growing up at the time. So it was not only good for him, it was good for us. And hopefully he's made, I know we have as parents, but hopefully he has made friends through that will last.
You found your tribe of other parents through that, really.
Yeah.
You're saying that was really supportive. You found that really supportive as a couple.
It was, and there's this troop, and I don't have other troops to compare it to, but this troop, there was other kids with like Will. Some kids were on the spectrum, not like Will, but there's have developmental issues, or there's even one girl was in the troop for a while who was 14, 15, questioning gender identity, right? And so kids these days compared to when I grew up, kids are so welcoming. They don't they're more supportive of other kids, and there was a lot of that present in this troop. And so it was ended up being a great place for him and for us. And so we're really lucky.
When we first spoke about that, when we were saying, what would be a recommendation or an encouragement for other parents that are walking this path of raising children that are neurodivergent in some way, was like, find your tribe, find your network. You're not alone. I remember that very, very clearly, and that really resonated.
Yeah, and so Will had a friend who he grew up with who lived down the end of the street, who was probably the polar opposite of Will, right? Again, he has two incredibly accomplished parents, both extremely smart. One's a physician, the other one's PhD in some sort of advanced math, and he was always a really good athlete. This kid, really smart. School came easy to him and stuff like that. And so I know at times that's why having that tribe of the people we found at Scouts and that at the lab school for Will is so important, because this kid was clearly and was kind of exceptional. And when we found this tribe, we were like, okay, not all kids at 13 are like this young fella, and so it ends up, you do have to find, I think, and you don't know where you're going to find it. Like I never would have thought Boy Scouts and sleeping on the ground and sending him off to camp in the summertime to live in a tent for 2 weeks without running water would be good for him or something he'd want to do. And it is just amazing that he did it all. And he really could have quit at any time. Like we weren't putting a lot of pressure on him. I mean, maybe towards the end when it was like, all right, Eagle Scouts within reach. You really got to bear down to get it done by the time you're 18. But those first years, he could have quit at any time. If he really came to us and said, I just don't like it. I don't want to do it. Whatever reason, we would have had a conversation with him. We would have certainly encouraged him to go, but he never did. He didn't even, never once said, hey, I want to quit, or never once said, I don't want to do it. He'd say, I don't want to go because I'm busy playing video games and I don't want to interrupt that to go to a scout meeting. But he never said, I don't want to go camping out. I don't want to go do this. I don't want to do that. And so he deserves so much credit for just sticking with it, with everything he does.
Yeah, well, you guys are incredibly supportive. Now he's 19 now, is that right?
Yes, just turned 19.
He's finished school, and you guys as a family, do you want to share where you are on your current adventure as a family?
Well, so as I said, my wife's a professor, and professors get sabbaticals roughly every 6 years. They can get 6 months off to go do some in-depth studying, get relief from their teaching responsibilities. My wife missed her last one because she was doing some service for the school. So she went 12 years without one, but, and kind of the deal she struck was, I would really like a year sabbatical when I'm done serving as chair of this department. And the university was accommodating to that. And so we knew she timed it with what would be, and we call them in the US, I don't know if you call them this in the UK, gap years, the year between high school and university, becoming significantly more common in the US with the idea that kids will go and mature a lot in that year before they go to college, before they go to university, and they'll have a more meaningful university experience. And so we had always thought that, well, maybe if it all lines up, if Will gets into college and college will accept him taking a gap year, my wife can take her sabbatical, and then I, in anticipation of this, started my own consulting business. We have since, we're probably, I think, in our 8th month of living in Europe, having not gone back to the US, and I've been back one day, I think, in 8 months to the US. So super fortunate. I'm working from here. My wife's doing research and is attached to some local universities, and we're spending some time in the UK. We were in Germany, and now we're in Switzerland. And so the other part of that, which makes it really interesting, is so our son's 19. He's definitely considered an adult here in the EU, and so in Switzerland and in Germany, he could only get a visa to stay here if he was actively engaged in some course of study. And usually it's a study of language, learning the local language or something like that. Well, a neurodivergent kid in this case doesn't really do well with languages. It just doesn't flow into his strengths. And he knows that, and we know that. And so we didn't really want to force him to do that. And so then the other part of it, of course, is that then you can only get a visa for 90 days in the EU. You can only be in the EU for 90 out of any 180 days. And so we've had to find ways for him to pop in and out of the EU. He's been doing a series of trips to some with organized tour groups, some on his own, where he's gone he's left the EU. So he went to Turkey for a couple of weeks on a trip, and he and I went to Ireland for a week to kind of see the familiar roots and understand kind of our heritage a little bit more. He's currently now, and this is the big chunk of the 90 out of 180 days, he's on a 90-day trip to Southeast Asia. which is what I think a life we would all like to have at 19 or at my age. But the beauty of going to Southeast Asia, it's not particularly expensive, and they're living in hostels and they're traveling by overnight bus, and it's nothing glamorous, but he's doing really well. He's fallen in love with traveling. His goal is to see every country before he dies. He's got a ticker going. I think he's up to 25 or 26 countries now. Just tremendous. And at age 19, it's crazy. But really, he's grown up a lot in this time. And so I think when he goes to university next year, I just think he'll be a little more mature. I think he'll be a little better prepared. I do worry that he hasn't been studying right for this year, so there will be some brain drain and some loss of routine that helped him do well in school. So we may have our hands full that first semester getting him back on track academically, but I think it's been a growth opportunity for him that it all came together, and I think it's something that will ideally pay dividends for the rest of his life.
So how I absolutely, I know on my gap year it was a really nice sort of bridge between school and young adult life at university. That different kind of independence in some way. How far away from your home is the university that he's going to go to?
It's not far. It's only about an hour and 15 minutes, and it's in a small town. It's semi-rural, so we'll be able to go and see him if he needs. But he had the amount of times he's called us on all these trips when he's been away, when he's needed something or needed us to help problem solve. It's been so small that I think he'll do well. And and you talk about finding a tribe. Will always finds a tribe. He finds people he gets along with. He's got a good sense of humor, and so people enjoy having him around. He's just a big, lovable kid who laughs at things, and so I think he'll do well. I hope he'll do well.
I'm sure he will. And I know when we talked previously, like this was right at the beginning of your adventure, really, before he'd embarked on his own tours and trips and stuff. Like I remember you saying, and remember you reflecting on, you guys as a couple have invested so much in his education, but ultimately all you want for him is to love learning, and it's a lifelong journey, and whatever career path he chooses to take, that's fine. But it was the desire to learn that was really important for you as a couple.
Yeah, and I don't think I could, I'm married to a college professor, right? So I think I chose somebody who, maybe we chose each other, I should say, who kind of, we saw that in each other as just a desire to make sure that education and learning for our offspring would be important. And I think he likes to learn. He loves history, which is, everybody says, oh, history, what are you going to do with that? Well, I was a history major, so he'll do something, right? He won't starve, I hope. Though the amount he eats, I always wonder.
Oh my goodness, the food, especially when
Yeah.
you're growing, my goodness, I can't quite fathom it at the beginning of adolescence for this
Well,
household.
so just as an aside, we talk about him. He'll be joining us here in Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
Switzerland's a pretty expensive country, surprisingly so. But food is exceptionally expensive. My wife and I keep joking that it's going to be, we got to send him back to Asia because the trip will be cheaper than what he could possibly eat in the course of a week. So, yeah, but he loves it. And it's part of why he loves traveling so much. He loves the history of these cultures. He's really kind of, and it was when he was a young kid, his school, the lab school, when he was in, I'm going to say 5th or 6th grade, they were teaching history about the Renaissance as part of like an art course.
Mm.
And he was totally enthralled with it. And he came home one day and said, "Can we go to Italy?" I'm like, yeah, we'll go. So, meaning someday, imagine someday it'll all come together. We'll get there, We're not. And so he went around telling everybody at school that he was going to Italy. Telling everybody he's going that summer. And the teachers just started saying, maybe it was a conspiracy amongst them all, and saying, the fact that you're taking Will to Italy to see all the stuff that he's been learning this year is just tremendous. That's going to be so good for him. So good for him. And so my wife ended up having a conference in Italy, well, actually in Greece that summer.
Yeah.
And so she was going to that, and we cashed in like all of our frequent flyer points and miles. And for a Christmas gift, we're like, all right, we'll take you in the summer because my wife could fly there and stop in Italy on the way back. So it was going to cost less in terms of flights and then the frequent flyer miles. So we scraped it together and managed to actually take him to Italy that summer. And maybe that's
Amazing.
where the bug got for travel
How,
got
yeah, absolutely.
installed.
How old was he that summer?
Fourth or fifth grade, maybe.
So what age is that? Is that like 10,
I want to say he was 8 or 9.
8 or 9? Okay.
Yeah.
And whereabouts in Italy did you guys go?
So we Florence and Rome because he was studying the Renaissance, and so it's all about Florence, right? And what the amazing thing was so we went to the Uffizi, which is the gallery in Florence, and we walked into one of the rooms, and there's a painting from let's say 1300s. I can't remember. It was really old, right? He said, "Oh, that's a Cimabue." And I go, "Who's Cimabue?" I've never heard of Cimabue. And we went over and looked at the artist's last name. Artist's name is Cimabue. And he goes, if that's Cimabue, that means that is his student over there. Or here was the master and here was the student, right? The two well-known names. But they had studied it in class and he had remembered it. And when we walked in, he was like, that's a Cimabue, that's a whomever. And we're like, yeah, right. And then we looked at him like, oh, kid's right.
And this is a child with dysgraphia. Imagine,
Right.
yeah, and so often when people can't document stuff, they make assumptions about intelligence, perception, understanding, all of those things. And yet, look what he was exposed to, and look, where that's just amazing, isn't it? When a child is given all those opportunities and how he has flourished and grown. I know as a couple that, and hopefully other people listening or someone listening, hearing this can see, you guys really poured into your child. And I know it's just one, and sometimes there are two or three, and you've got competing needs. But you've been able to build that. Particularly what I'm hearing all the way through this, and when we've spoken previously, those early years and that kind of foundation that you were able to put in place, and how that's kind of set him up and on an amazing start to adulthood. And that's incredible. And when people are given
Yeah.
those opportunities, the difference it can make in a person's life and your own lives as a family. You guys, not everybody's an academic or has an incredibly successful career, but you have those internal expectations for your child, applying to those different schools. He's not getting in, how that makes you feel as a parent and what's wrong, but how do we work with this? I mean, it's been an incredible journey that should be really celebrated, Pat. I mean, you guys, look at all that you've walked through.
And look, and my wife especially worked really hard to make all this happen, and she deserves all the credit. Uh, there's also some serendipity involved, right? So being in Baltimore, we had these great diagnostic facilities and capabilities, and then finding this great school that was just a mile, 2 mile and a half, 2 miles down the road that was arts based, and that was good for him. I mean, that talk about luck.
Yeah.
And then finding a really supportive so that educational foundation at school was great. Finding a Boy Scout troop that he liked and had just really super committed. I mean, amazingly committed parents to growing and nurturing young boys into men. And then the last part is as bad as COVID was, I think, for every kid in terms of educational advancement. I think every kid kind of suffered. Will doesn't do well on standardized tests. And in the United States, we take the what are called the SATs, standardized tests that colleges use to help determine your entrance into the university. Now, there's a lot of problems with SATs, and colleges have been getting away from them. But COVID accelerated that shift away from using SATs. And so Will was potentially looking at taking the SATs, getting accommodations, a significantly longer amount of time to make sure he could do this. But he took them, and the results weren't great. They were maybe not even good, right? But but because of COVID, all the colleges that he applied to, all the universities, were like, we don't care. We've gone test optional, and we really mean that. You don't need to send us your test scores. And so that has helped him get into the university that he wanted to go to, because maybe while his grades were good and he had, he ended up being running on the track team, and, as he said, cheering from the rear because he wasn't a great runner. Ended up being, so he had some extracurriculars with sports and with being an Eagle Scout, but it was really that having to take those tests that had a huge impact as well on his future educational career. So yes, my wife worked incredibly hard, and we did a lot of things. There's also some serendipity, some luck involved at different, where we live, finding the testing, finding the right school, and kind of hitting that period of not having to submit SATs for college. So I don't know, maybe you make your own luck, but some of those things were clearly outside of our control.
Yeah. Yeah. So that can be a significant barrier for people, can't it?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Pat, I really appreciate you with taking time to share your journey as a parent and what you've built around Will. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more in the years to come, Pat, like hearing
Oh,
his
sure.
story, how he goes through university and into the next phase of his life.
We're all excited to see it. I think every parent probably who has to go through this has moments of incredible self doubt
Yeah.
and um, concern, and for the present and for the future. And I think that idea of just finding the right tribe, finding people who share your concerns, who you can ask questions of, who have maybe been through this themselves or with an older sibling, who recognize that there's no such thing as a dumb question, right? And I think that's really important to helping one develop successful strategies to support your child, but also to develop successful strategies to support yourself and your spouse, and to make sure that dealing with some of these struggles don't, and they are struggles, right? Struggles for the parents, right? They may not always be, the child may not perceive them that way. That's just what it is for the child. But sometimes for us as parents, these are struggles. To make sure those struggles don't negatively impact the relationship with your spouse or the rest of your family, those are some big things and that to
Yeah.
have to deal with. And I think parents, families, in our case, it's just parents, but families in most cases, they really need to work extra hard, and they need to find that support where they can,
Yeah.
because it's tough sometimes. It
It
really is.
is. And then just kind of on that, in terms of your own support and as parents, did you guys ever explore kind of counseling support or coaching support? Was there anything in addition to your tribe that you found helpful?
No, we didn't. I don't know where we would have found the time, quite honestly. I mean, I think we would have. I guess if we had to, if we felt we needed, we would have made the time. I don't think we ever felt we needed it, but if people think it's going to help them, my gosh, all means go and explore that as well,
Explore
right?
that.
He, it,
It's
what,
whatever support you need as parents and as a couple. Find your people, find your person. As you said, advocating for your child is almost, you have to as a parent, but you kind of need double courage to do it with a child that needs additional support in some way.
Yeah, and that's when we were at the when Will was at the lab school. We there was so the lab school would bring in, like in many cases, the city of Baltimore or surrounding cities, when they couldn't offer the educational support for a student, they would send that student to his school, and they would pay for it. And we met just some incredible people, single moms who, had to fight tooth and nail the city bureaucracy to make sure the bureaucracy would recognize their child's needs and send a child to that school. And I don't know how, talk about how things can be draining emotionally and even physically, just to see as people do that to get their kids the opportunities that they needed.
Mm.
One, it was amazing, awe-inspiring, really. Uh, and I just think it shouldn't be that difficult, but I guess we're all glad that there are people who are going through those lengths, through those activities to get their kids the support and the help they need, because um, it does make a difference. And maybe the kid doesn't realize it at the point, but I'm sure at some point later in life they'll appreciate it. We don't do it for the thanks, right? We just do it because it's what we're supposed to do.
Yeah,
And some people have to do a little bit more.
yeah, yeah, they do, and I think that will resonate a lot for people. Just to hear that it doesn't really matter where you are in the world. Getting that access to support. I mean, it's about equity of access, isn't it, for your child?
Yeah.
They just need a bit more infrastructure to be able to achieve the things that they are capable of achieving with the right support. I think I think it's a story that resonates the world over, whether it's the USA, UK, Australia. I can think of friends in Southeast Asia, South Africa, all over the world. I think that story will resonate. So
Yeah, you're right. It doesn't matter whether it's a U.S. based system that relies on private insurance and kind of, or if it's a UK that's got a more of a national health system. These kids are getting the support and help they need because parents are refusing to accept the status quo, and instead they want to find the best options for their kids. And that can be draining, that can be so tiring. And so that's the importance of finding your tribe and having the support, having good family support, social supports. And family doesn't have to be blood relatives. It can be the people that you love who help you out. Those are the people that I think those are the ones that we need as parents going through this, to making sure that we can deliver for our kids the things that we need to.
yeah, thank you, Pat.
Oh, my
I
pleasure.
know I know that we could talk at length, but I think maybe we're at a good point now, that hopefully that something has resonated for you who's listening. That find your tribe. You're not alone. And
Very
so,
much so.
thank you so much again.
Thank you, Diana. This was fun.
Thank you. So you've been listening to Even the Dog Has ADHD, because apples don't fall far from trees and there never is just one.